The Whitmore mansion had 12 bedrooms, but only 2 beating hearts, until Naomi Washington arrived. Richard thought he'd hired a maid to polish marble in silence. Instead, this woman dared to kneel beside his disabled son Daniel in the rain, teaching him to walk while Richard built his fortune 3,000 miles away. When a millionaire came home early and saw them together, his boy clinging to her hand, laughing for the first time since his mother's death, Richard's rage could have shattered windows. "What's going on here?" would echo through that garden, setting off a war between a father who managed grief like a business merger and a woman who understood that some broken things needed love, not money, to heal. But Daniel, 6 years old and fierce with newfound courage, would choose Naomi over his father's anger, screaming words that would crack Richard's controlled world wide open. "She cares about me. And sometimes the family you desperately need isn't the one you planned. It's the one brave enough to show up when you're drowning in your own perfect loneliness." Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today, and if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed. The morning sun cast long shadows through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Whitmore mansion, painting golden streaks across the Italian marble floors. Richard Whitmore stood in the foyer, his Armani suit perfectly pressed, his leather briefcase waiting by the door like an obedient servant. Everything in his world operated on schedule, every detail meticulously planned. "Daniel," he called up the sweeping staircase, checking his Rolex for the 3rd time. "Come say goodbye." The soft tap-tap-tap of crutches against hardwood echoed from above. Richard's jaw tightened slightly, not from impatience, but from that familiar pang he felt whenever he heard that sound. 6-year-old Daniel appeared at the top of the stairs, his small frame supported by custom-made titanium crutches that had cost more than most people's cars. "Careful on the stairs," Richard said, his voice carrying that particular tone of controlled concern he'd perfected over the years. He watched as Daniel navigated each step with determination, his sandy hair falling into his eyes. "I'm being careful, Daddy," Daniel replied, concentrating on each movement. When he finally reached the bottom, Richard knelt down, careful not to wrinkle his suit, and placed a brief kiss on his son's forehead. "I'll be back late next week. Mr. Hale will take care of everything you need. Your tutors will come as scheduled, and Naomi will be here," Daniel interrupted, his blue eyes brightening at the mention of her name. Richard's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. "The maid will maintain the house, yes. But remember, she's staff, Daniel. Mr. Hale is in charge of your care." Daniel nodded, but his fingers gripped his crutches a little tighter. Richard stood, smoothing his jacket. "Be good. Follow your schedule. I'll call every evening at 7. "Okay, Daddy." Richard picked up his briefcase and headed for the door where his driver waited. He didn't look back. He never did. Looking back meant acknowledging the doubt that sometimes crept into his mind, the whisper that maybe his son needed more than schedules and expensive therapists. The heavy oak door closed with a definitive thud, and Daniel stood alone in the vast foyer. The house seemed to expand around him, growing larger and emptier with each passing second. From somewhere in the West Wing, he heard the soft humming of Naomi as she worked. 20 minutes later, Daniel made his way to the garden, determined to practice walking on the uneven stone path his physical therapist had recommended. The morning air was crisp, and dewdrops still clung to the manicured grass. He positioned his crutches carefully, took a deep breath, and started forward. The 3rd step was where it went wrong. His left crutch caught on a raised stone, and suddenly the world tilted. Daniel's stomach lurched as he felt himself falling, the ground rushing up to meet him. Strong arms caught him before he hit the stones. Naomi's arms. "Easy there, little man," she said, her voice warm like honey. She didn't immediately pull him upright, instead kneeling beside him, so they were eye level. "You okay?" Daniel nodded, his cheeks flushing with embarrassment. "I'm supposed to be able to do this by myself." Naomi studied his face for a moment. She was in her late 20s, with natural hair pulled back in a neat bun and eyes that seemed to see more than they should. Her uniform was simple, a gray dress with white collar, but she wore it with a dignity that made it seem like something more. "You know what I think?" she said, adjusting his grip on the crutches. "I think you're stronger than you know. But being strong doesn't mean doing everything alone. My dad says I need to be independent. Your dad's right about a lot of things, Naomi replied carefully. But even the strongest people need support sometimes. Here, let me show you something. She guided his hands to a different position on the crutches. Feel that. When you grip here, you have more control. And watch, she demonstrated a slight shift in weight distribution. If you lean just a little forward when you feel unsteady, your center stays over your feet. Daniel tried it, taking a tentative step. It felt different, more stable. That's it, Naomi encouraged. See? You're not weak, Daniel. You just needed someone to show you a different way. From an upstairs window, Mr. Hale, the butler, observed the scene with his perpetually neutral expression. He'd worked for the Whitmore family for 15 years, and in all that time, he'd never seen Daniel smile quite like that. Over the following days, a routine developed that existed in the spaces Richard's schedules didn't account for. After Daniel's official physical therapy sessions, Naomi would happen to be cleaning nearby. She'd brought out a set of colorful flashcards, not the medical ones his therapist used, but ones she'd made herself with pictures of superheroes in various action poses. Okay, superhero training time, she'd whisper, making Daniel giggle. This one's called the Iron Man stance. Plant your feet like you're about to fly. They'd practice balance exercises disguised as games, Naomi always keeping one eye out for other staff members. When footsteps approached, the flashcards would disappear into her apron pocket, and she'd resume dusting something nearby. Why do we have to hide? Daniel asked one afternoon. Naomi paused in her movement, choosing her words carefully. Your daddy wants what's best for you. He just has very specific ideas about what that looks like. Sometimes grown-ups get so focused on one way of doing things, they can't see other ways might work too. The Whitmore mansion was a study in contradictions. Every room was filled with priceless art and furniture, yet felt hollow. The walls displayed family portraits from generations of Whitmores, but the most recent one, Richard, his late wife Catherine, and baby Daniel, seemed to watch over empty rooms with sad eyes. The house had 12 bedrooms, but only 2 were ever used. It had a music room with a grand piano that hadn't been played since Catherine died. Daniel spent his free time in the sunroom, drawing. Naomi discovered his artwork one day while cleaning dozens of pictures of families. But these weren't typical childhood drawings. Each one showed 3 figures: a tall man in a suit, a small boy with crutches, and a woman with dark skin and kind eyes. In every picture, they were holding hands. That's beautiful, Naomi said softly, careful not to startle him. Daniel looked up, suddenly shy. It's just pretend. The best things usually start as pretend, she replied, sitting down beside him. What's happening in this one? We're at the park, Daniel explained, pointing to the green scribbles that represented grass. And we're having a picnic. And nobody has to leave for business trips. Naomi's heart ached. That sounds wonderful. Do you have a family, Naomi? I have a younger brother, she said. His name is Caleb. Does he live with you? No. He lives in a special care facility. He uses a wheelchair. Daniel's eyes widened. Like me? I mean, not exactly like me, but similar challenges, different tools, Naomi nodded. He's actually the one who taught me that being strong isn't about doing things the normal way. It's about finding your own way. That evening, Richard's scheduled call came precisely at 7. Daniel sat in his father's study, the phone on speaker. How was your day? Richard's voice crackled through the line. Good. I practiced walking. Excellent. Did Mr. Thompson say you're making progress? Richard referred to the physical therapist. Yes. Good. And your math tutor? We did fractions. Very good. There was a pause, the sound of papers shuffling on Richard's end. Daniel, has the maid been keeping her distance? She's not interfering with your schedule, is she? Daniel glanced at the doorway, where Naomi was passing with a laundry basket. No, Daddy. Good. I've told her explicitly. She's there to clean, nothing more. I don't want her filling your head with. Well, just remember, she's not qualified to help with your exercises. That's what we pay professionals for. Yes, Daddy. I have to go. Another meeting. Be good. Bye, Daddy. The line went dead. Daniel sat in the enormous leather chair, his feet dangling far from the floor. From the hallway, Naomi watched him curl into himself, becoming smaller in that too-big chair. That night, as Naomi did her final rounds, she found Daniel's door slightly ajar. Peering in, she saw him clutching something purple, her scarf that she'd left on a chair earlier. He held it close to his face, whispering something she couldn't quite hear. But the word "mommy" drifted across the dark room like a ghost. She backed away silently, her throat tight. In her small quarters in the staff wing, Naomi sat on her narrow bed and pulled out a worn photo from her nightstand. It showed a younger version of herself with Caleb, before the accident that put him in a wheelchair. She traced his smiling face with her finger. "I know why I can't walk away from this job," she whispered to the photo. "That little boy needs someone who sees him, not just his limitations." The next morning, Luis, the gardener, stopped Naomi as she hung laundry in the backyard. He was in his 50s, with sun-weathered skin and knowing eyes. "The boy's different when you're around," he said in his soft voice. "Stronger." Naomi kept her eyes on the sheets she was hanging. "He's a strong kid. He just needs encouragement." Mr. Whitmore wouldn't see it that way. "Mr. Whitmore sees what he wants to see," Naomi replied, then caught herself. "I shouldn't have said that. Luis Chekhov. We all think it, Mija. That man loves his son, but he loves him like he loves his investments, from a distance, with lots of management. Daniel needs more than management." "Be careful," Luis warned gently. "I've seen Mr. Whitmore fire people for far less than what you're doing. I'm just helping a little boy walk better. You're doing more than that, and we both know it." That afternoon, Richard called Naomi directly. Her phone rang while she was helping Daniel with a particularly challenging balance exercise. She quickly stepped away, motioning for Daniel to keep practicing. "Mr. Whitmore, I'm extending my trip." His voice was crisp, businesslike. "I won't be back until late next week, possibly Thursday or Friday. I trust you can maintain the house without supervision." "Of course, sir." "And Naomi," his tone sharpened, "I want to be very clear about something. You're not to interfere with my son's upbringing. You're not his therapist, you're not his teacher, and you're certainly not his mother. Just keep the house clean. That's what I pay you for." Naomi gripped the phone tighter, biting back the words she wanted to say. "I understand, Mr. Whitmore." "Good. I don't want to have this conversation again." The line went dead. Naomi stood there for a moment, anger and sadness warring in her chest. She turned to find Daniel watching her, his small face anxious. "Was Daddy mad?" "No, sweetheart." She caught herself. "No, Daniel. Your father just wanted to make sure everything was running smoothly." "He doesn't like you helping me, does he?" Naomi knelt down to his level. "Your father wants what's best for you. He just has specific ideas about what that looks like," Daniel finished. "You already told me that." She smiled sadly. "You're too smart for your own good. Will you still help me, even if Daddy doesn't like it?" Naomi looked into those earnest blue eyes and made a decision that would change everything. "Yes, but it'll be our secret superhero training, okay?" Daniel nodded solemnly, then threw his arms around her neck in a fierce hug. Naomi held him close, feeling the trembling in his small body, not from weakness, but from the intensity of emotion he rarely got to express. Neither of them knew that 3,000 miles away, Richard was staring at a canceled contract. The deal he'd flown to Los Angeles to close had fallen through due to a last-minute regulatory issue. He sat in his hotel room, frustrated and restless. "Book me a flight home," he told his assistant, Evan. "First available. Tonight, if possible." "But, sir, you have meetings scheduled for." "Cancel them. All of them. I'm going home." He didn't call ahead. Richard Whitmore never announced his arrivals, in business or in life. He preferred to see things as they really were, not as people prepared them to be. It was a strategy that had served him well in boardrooms. He had no idea what he was about to walk into. The morning sun had broken through the clouds after an early shower, leaving the garden path slick with a mixture of dew and rain. Perfect conditions for practicing balance, Naomi had thought when she saw Daniel gazing longingly out the window after breakfast. "The path's all wet," he'd said, disappointment clear in his voice. "That's exactly why we should practice," Naomi had replied, helping him with his crutches. The world isn't always dry and perfect. You need to know you can handle it when it's not. Now, they were in the garden, and Daniel was doing remarkably well. The wet flagstones that would have terrified him a week ago were just another challenge to overcome. Naomi knelt beside him, her gray uniform damp at the knees from the wet ground, one hand hovering near his elbow. Not touching, just ready. That's it, she encouraged as Daniel navigated a particularly treacherous patch where water had pooled. Feel how your weight shifts. Trust your body. It knows what to do. Daniel's face was scrunched in concentration, the tip of his tongue poking out slightly as it always did when he focused hard. I can do it. Don't let go yet. Wait, you're not holding me. He laughed, a sound of pure joy that echoed across the garden. It was the kind of laugh that had been absent from the Whitmore mansion for far too long. You're doing it all by yourself, Naomi beamed. I told you you're stronger than. The sound of car, tires on gravel cut through the morning air like a blade. Richard's Bentley pulled into the circular driveway with the smooth precision of expensive engineering. The driver's door opened, and Richard stepped out, expecting to find his house exactly as he'd left it. Quiet, ordered, controlled. Instead, he saw his son in the garden with the maid. But it wasn't just that Naomi was with Daniel. It was how she was with him. She was kneeling in the wet grass, her hand hovering protectively near his body, coaching him like a parent, like Catherine used to do before. What's going on here? Richard's voice exploded across the garden with such force that birds erupted from the nearby trees. Daniel, startled by the sudden shout, lost his balance. His left crutch slipped on the wet stone, and he started to fall. Naomi moved without thinking, catching Daniel and pulling him against her, shielding him with her body as if protecting him from more than just a fall. Daddy. Daniel's voice was small, confused. He clung to Naomi, his fingers gripping her arm. Richard stormed forward, his Italian leather shoes splashing through puddles he didn't even notice. His face was a storm of emotions. Anger, confusion, something that might have been fear. I asked what's going on here, he repeated, his voice lower but no less dangerous. Mr. Whitmore, Naomi began, keeping her voice calm and steady even as her heart raced. Daniel was practicing his walking. The wet surface provides a good challenge for. Don't. Richard cut her off with a sharp gesture. Don't you dare try to explain to me what my son needs. Daniel pushed away from Naomi slightly, though he kept hold of her hand. Don't yell at her, Daddy. She was helping me walk. The raw honesty in his son's voice stopped Richard cold for a moment. Daniel had never defended anyone against him before, had never raised his voice like that. Richard's jaw clenched as he fought for control. To him, the scene looked like everything he'd explicitly forbidden. This woman, this maid, was overstepping every boundary he'd set. She was trying to insert herself into their lives, trying to fill a role that no one had the right to fill. I can walk better now, Daddy. Look, Daniel tried to demonstrate, taking a shaky step forward, but his crutches were still slick from the wet ground. Stop, Richard commanded. Just stop. The garden fell silent except for the dripping of water from the leaves. From the house, faces appeared in windows. Mr. Hale in the study, Louise by the tool shed, the cook peering from the kitchen. She was only helping, Daniel said again, his voice smaller now, trembling. She teaches me things. Teaches you. Richard's eyes snapped to Naomi. What exactly have you been teaching my son? Naomi stood slowly, her dignity intact despite her wet knees and the fury radiating from her employer. Balance exercises, Mr. Whitmore. Techniques to help him navigate different surfaces safely. Techniques, Richard repeated, his voice dripping with disdain. And what qualifies you to teach my son anything? What medical degree do you have? What certification? I have experience with. Experience. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. You're a maid. You clean houses. You do not practice medicine on my son. It's not medicine, Daddy. It's just, Daniel tried to interject. Go inside, Daniel. But, now, Daniel looked between his father and Naomi, tears starting to form in his eyes. Naomi gave him the slightest nod, mouthing it's okay. He reluctantly started toward the house, his progress slow and dejected. Richard waited until Daniel was out of earshot before stepping closer to Naomi. You were explicitly told not to interfere with my son's care. He needed encouragement, sir. That's all. Naomi kept her voice level, professional, even as anger burned her chest at the way he'd frightened Daniel. Encouragement, Richard scoffed. Is that what you call it? It looked to me like you were trying to play mother to my son. The word mother hung in the air between them like a challenge. Naomi's calm expression finally cracked, just slightly. I was trying to help a little boy who spends most of his time alone in a house full of employees who are too afraid of you to show him any warmth. The silence that followed was deafening. Richard's face went from red to white and back to red again. From the kitchen window, the cook whispered to Mr. Hale, who had joined her. She actually said it. He came home early, Mr. Hale murmured back. This will get ugly. Louise had moved closer to the house, pretending to inspect the rose bushes while keeping an ear on the confrontation. He'd worked for rich families his whole life, and he knew this dance. The help overstepping, the boss reasserting control. It never ended well for the help. How dare you? Richard's voice was quiet now, which was somehow worse than the shouting. You know nothing about my family. I know your son draws pictures of the family he wishes he had. Naomi replied, her own control finally slipping. I know he whispers mommy to my scarf at night because it's the closest thing to maternal comfort he has. I know he's capable of so much more than you think if someone would just believe in him instead of managing him like a broken investment. Richard's hands clenched into fists at his sides. For a moment, Naomi thought he might actually strike her. Instead, he took a step back. My office. Now. He turned and strode toward the house, expecting her to follow. Naomi took a breath, smoothed her damp uniform, and walked after him with her head high. Daniel was waiting in the foyer, tears streaming down his face. Daddy, please. Mr. Hale, take Daniel to his room. Richard ordered without looking at his son. I want her here. She cares about me. Daniel's voice rose to almost a scream, the most emotion anyone had seen from him since his mother's funeral. Richard finally looked at his son, and for just a moment, his harsh expression wavered. Daniel looked so small, so desperate. But then Richard's jaw set again. To my office, Ms. Washington. We're going to discuss boundaries. Now. As Naomi passed Daniel, she reached out and squeezed his shoulder gently. It's going to be okay, she whispered, though she wasn't sure she believed it herself. Mr. Hale gently guided Daniel toward the stairs, but the boy's sobs echoed through the mansion. Every staff member in the house heard them, and everyone knew that something fundamental had just shifted in the Whitmore household. Richard stood in his office, staring out the window at the garden where moments ago his whole ordered world had tilted off its axis. He'd built his life on control, on keeping everything in its proper place. But the image burned into his mind, his son clinging to the maid, choosing her comfort over his father's arrival, suggested that perhaps his control had always been an illusion. Behind him, the door opened. Naomi entered, closing it softly behind her. The real confrontation was about to begin. The office door closed with a definitive click, sealing Richard and Naomi into a space that suddenly felt too small despite its generous proportions. Richard's study was all dark mahogany and leather, diplomas and awards covering one wall, family photographs notably absent except for a single silver frame turned face down on the desk. Richard moved behind his desk, using it as a barrier, a position of power. He didn't sit. Neither did Naomi. What game are you playing? His voice was controlled now, the businessman returning. You think my son needs you more than his own father? Naomi stood straight, hands clasped in front of her. I'm not playing any game, Mr. Whitmore. I'm helping a child who desperately needs connection. Connection? Richard laughed bitterly. Is that what you call undermining my authority? Going behind my back? I gave you explicit instructions. To let your son struggle alone while surrounded by people too afraid to show him warmth? Naomi interrupted, her composure cracking. Yes, you made that very clear. Richard's eyes narrowed. You forget your place. My place. Naomi took a step forward. My place is wherever a child needs help. I know what it's like to watch someone you love struggle with mobility. My younger brother. I don't care about your brother, Richard snapped. I care about mine's son, and you're confusing him. Filling his head with false hope. False hope? Have you seen him walk lately? Really seen him? Naomi's voice rose slightly. He's made more progress in the past 2 weeks than in the previous 2 months. That's not false hope. That's real improvement. Based on what medical assessment? Your expertise in mopping floors. The insult hung in the air. Naomi's hands clenched at her sides, but when she spoke, her voice was steady. Based on watching a child bloom when someone believes in him. Based on techniques I learned caring for my brother Caleb after his accident. 2 years of watching physical therapists, occupational therapists, learning everything I could to help him. That doesn't make you qualified. What makes someone qualified to love a child, Mr. Whitmore? The question stopped him cold. Because that's what Daniel's been missing. Not another specialist, not another structured program. Love. Encouragement. Someone who sees him as more than a problem to be managed. A movement in the doorway caught their attention. Daniel stood there, his small frame trembling, tears streaming down his face. Neither of them had heard him approach. Daniel, go back to your room, Richard ordered, but his voice had lost its edge. No, Daniel said, his chin lifting with a defiance that shocked his father. I want to know why you hate Naomi. I don't, Richard faltered. This is an adult conversation. About me. Daniel's voice cracked. It's always about me, but never includes me. Naomi's the only one who actually talks to me instead of about me. Richard looked at his son, really looked at him. When had Daniel learned to stand so straight? When had that fire entered his eyes? She's meddling, Richard said, but the words sounded weak even to him. She's helping, Daniel countered. She makes me feel like I can do things instead of just telling me what I can't do. From the hallway, hushed voices drifted in. The staff had gathered, pretending to clean nearby, while straining to hear. Mr. Hale appeared, gently trying to guide Daniel away, but the boy stood firm. Master Daniel, perhaps we should. No, Mr. Hale. I am staying. Naomi knelt down to Daniel's level, wiping his tears with her thumb. Sweetheart, your father's just worried about you. He wants to protect you. From what? From being happy. Daniel's words cut through the room like a blade. Richard flinched visibly. He sank into his desk chair, suddenly looking older than his 32 years. For a moment, the mask slipped, and Naomi saw not a controlling millionaire, but a lost man drowning in his own grief. Your mother, Richard started, then stopped. He picked up the face-down photograph on his desk, staring at it. Your mother had this way of making everything better. When she died, I promised I'd protect you. Keep you safe. Safe isn't the same as happy, Daddy, Daniel said softly. The room fell silent except for the ticking of the antique clock on the mantel. Richard set down the photograph, Catherine's smiling face now visible, her arms around a baby Daniel. Mr. Whitmore, Naomi ventured carefully, I'm not trying to replace anyone. I'm just trying to help Daniel reach his potential. Richard's phone buzzed. He glanced at it. Evan, his assistant. He ignored it. The staff talks, Richard said finally, his voice tired. They whisper about you and Daniel. Some say you're manipulating your way into our lives. Others say you're the only real warmth in this house. Which do you believe? Naomi asked. Richard didn't answer. Instead, he opened a desk drawer and pulled out a manila folder. Your employment file. Clean background check, good references. But nothing about medical training. Because I didn't finish the program, Naomi admitted. My mother had a stroke. Someone needed to care for Caleb full-time. I chose family over a certificate. Yet you think you know better than the specialists I hire? I think I know Daniel. Naomi's voice was firm. I know he hides his drawings under his bed because he's afraid you'll think they're childish. I know he practices walking at night when he thinks everyone's asleep because he wants to surprise you, but is terrified of disappointing you. I know he hasn't had anyone tuck him in since your wife died because you stop at his doorway, but never come all the way in. Richard's face paled. Ow! Because I pay attention. Because I care. Because that's what Daniel needs, someone who sees him, not his disability. Daniel moved closer to his father's desk. Daddy, when Naomi helps me, I feel like Mommy's watching. Like she'd be happy. Richard's composure finally cracked completely. He put his head in his hands, shoulders shaking slightly. When he looked up, his eyes were red-rimmed. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted, the words barely audible. "Every time I look at him, I see her. Every time he struggles, I feel like I'm failing her." "You're not failing," Naomi said gently. "You're grieving. But Daniel's grieving too, and he needs his father." Richard's phone rang, Evan again. This time he answered, needing the distraction. "What is it?" "Sir, the Patterson deal needs your signature, and the board wants an update on." "Later, Evan." Richard hung up and stood, pacing to the window. Outside, Louise was pretending to trim already perfect hedges while obviously eavesdropping. "The whole house is watching," Richard muttered. "They care about Daniel too," Naomi said. "Mr. Hale, Louise, cook. We all want what's best for him. And you think you know what that is?" "I think Daniel knows. Why don't you ask him?" Richard turned to his son. "Daniel, what do you want?" Daniel didn't hesitate. "I want Naomi to stay. I want you to stay home more. I want us to have dinner together like the families in my drawings." "Your drawings?" Daniel nodded, suddenly shy. "I'll show you." He left, his crutches tapping urgently toward his room. Richard and Naomi stood in awkward silence until he returned with a stack of papers. Richard spread them across his desk, his expression growing more pained with each image, all showing the same three figures, always together, always happy. "This is what you want?" Richard asked. "This is what I dream about," Daniel replied. Richard studied the drawings for a long moment. Then he looked at Naomi. "You've been spending unauthorized time with my son, teaching him techniques that haven't been approved by his medical team. You've overstepped every boundary I set." Naomi lifted her chin, ready for dismissal. "But," Richard continued, "he's walking better. He's happier." The admission seemed to physically pain him. "1 week. You can continue working with Daniel for 1 week. Under supervision. If his therapist approves of your methods, we'll discuss a more formal arrangement." "Daddy, really?" Daniel's face lit up. "Conditions," Richard held up a finger. "Everything goes through Mr. Thompson during his sessions. No more secrets. No more hiding." "Agreed," Naomi said quickly. "And you," Richard looked at his son, "you tell me if anything makes you uncomfortable. Promise?" "I promise, Daddy." Richard nodded stiffly. "Now, Daniel, go wash up for dinner. Ms. Washington, we're not finished." Daniel hugged Naomi quickly before leaving, his steps noticeably lighter. Once alone again, Richard's professional mask returned. "I'm watching you," he warned. "One wrong move, one sign you're taking advantage of my son's affection, and you're gone." "Understood." "And Ms. Washington? That comment about loving my money more than my son?" Naomi met his gaze steadily. "I apologize for my tone, not the sentiment." Richard's jaw clenched, but he dismissed her with a wave. As she reached the door, he called out, "The drawings? How long has he been making them?" "Since I started here." 3 months. 3 months of his son dreaming of a family while Richard buried himself in work. The door closed, leaving Richard alone with the drawings spread across his desk and the ghost of his wife's photograph watching him fail. The dinner that followed was the most awkward meal the Whitmore mansion had seen in years. Richard sat at the head of the massive dining table, Daniel to his right, the distance between them feeling like miles despite being just a few feet. The chandelier cast shadows that danced across their faces, making the silence even more oppressive. "The salmon is excellent," Richard finally said, though he'd barely touched his plate. "Cook made it special since you're home," Daniel offered, pushing his own food around. "That was thoughtful." More silence. The clink of silverware on china echoed through the room. From the kitchen, muffled voices could be heard, the staff discussing the afternoon's drama in hushed tones. "Daddy," Daniel's voice was small. "Yes. Are you really going to fire Naomi?" Richard set down his fork. "I haven't decided yet. But you said 1 week." "I said we try 1 week. That's not a promise, Daniel. It's a trial period." Daniel's face crumpled. "You always do this. You always make everything about trials and deals and conditions. Why can't you just let someone care about me? I care about you. From far away. From behind doors. From conference calls." Daniel's voice rose with each phrase. "Naomi actually sits with me. She actually helps me. She actually sees me." "Daniel, that's enough." "No, it's not enough." It's never enough. Daniel pushed back from the table, grabbing his crutches. I heard you on the phone with Mr. Thompson yesterday. You asked if I was progressing within acceptable parameters. I'm not a business report, Daddy. I'm your son. The boy fled the dining room, his crutches striking the floor with angry percussion. Richard sat frozen, his son's words echoing in the sudden silence. Mr. Hale appeared in the doorway. Shall I go after him, sir? No, let him go. But even as he said it, Richard felt the wrongness of it. Catherine would have followed. Catherine would have known what to say. Catherine would have. He stood abruptly and walked to his study, closing the door firmly behind him. The drawings were still on his desk. He picked one up. Daniel had drawn himself standing without crutches, Naomi on one side, Richard on the other, all three holding hands under a rainbow. At the bottom, in Daniel's shaky handwriting, "My happy family." Richard poured himself a scotch and stood at the window, watching the sun set over his perfectly manicured estate. Everything in his life was perfect, everything except the one thing that actually mattered. Upstairs, Naomi knocked softly on Daniel's door. "Daniel? It's me. Come in," came a muffled reply. She found him face down on his bed, shoulders shaking with sobs. His crutches were thrown carelessly on the floor, something he never did. Naomi sat on the edge of the bed, rubbing his back gently. "He's going to send you away," Daniel said into his pillow. "We don't know that." "Yes, we do. That's what he does. Anyone who gets too close, anyone who makes him feel things, he sends them away." "Who told you that?" Daniel sat up, wiping his eyes. "Mr. Hale. Not directly, but I heard him talking to Cook once. About how Daddy fired the grief counselor after Mommy died, and the nanny who tried to hug him, and anyone who reminded him of how things used to be." Naomi pulled Daniel into a hug. "Your father's hurting, sweetheart. Sometimes when people hurt, they push others away because feeling nothing seems easier than feeling pain." "Do you think he loved Mommy?" "I know he did. I can see it in how much it still hurts him." "Then why won't he love me the same way?" Naomi's heart broke. "Oh, Daniel, he does love you. He just doesn't know how to show anymore. It's like, imagine if you forgot how to use your crutches. You'd still want to walk, but you wouldn't remember the movements." "You could teach him," Daniel said hopefully. "Like you taught me. I don't think your father wants to learn from me." "Then I'll make him." Before Naomi could respond, Daniel was moving, grabbing his crutches with new determination. He made his way to the door with surprising speed. Daniel waited, but he was already in the hallway, heading for the stairs with a purpose that made Naomi nervous. She followed, watching as he navigated the steps with more confidence than she'd ever seen. Daniel burst into his father's study without knocking. Richard looked up from the drawings, startled. "Daniel, you should be in bed." "No." Daniel's shout was so forceful that Richard actually stepped back. "You're going to listen to me for once." "Daniel." I said no. The boy was trembling, but his voice was strong. "You fired everyone who tried to help us after Mommy died. You pushed away anyone who made you remember her. But guess what, Daddy? I remember her every day, and it hurts, and you're not here to help me with it." Richard opened his mouth, but Daniel wasn't finished. "Naomi's the first person who made me feel like maybe it's okay to hurt. Maybe it's okay to need help. Maybe it's okay to not be perfect all the time. But you want to fire her because she makes you feel things too. Because she makes you remember that we're supposed to be a family, not a business." That's not. It is true. Everything in your life has to be controlled and scheduled and perfect. But families aren't perfect, Daddy. They're messy and loud, and they hug each other, and they make mistakes, and they forgive each other. Naomi taught me that. Daniel's crutches were shaking now from the effort of standing so long, but he refused to sit. "If you send her away," Daniel's voice dropped to almost a whisper, "I'll never forgive you. And I'll stop trying. I'll stop the exercises, stop the therapy, stop everything. Because what's the point of learning to walk if I have nowhere to walk to? No one to walk with?" The silence that followed was deafening. Richard stared at his 6-year-old son as if seeing him for the first time. This wasn't the quiet, compliant child he'd left that morning. This was a warrior, fighting for something he believed in. "You give up walking?" Richard's voice was hoarse. "I'd give up everything if it means being alone again." Richard sank into his chair. Outside, Thunder rumbled in the distance, a storm approaching. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. Your mother used to stand up to me like that. When I'd work too late, when I'd miss dinner, when I'd schedule meetings during your doctor appointments. She'd plant herself in my office doorway and refuse to move until I listened. I remember, Daniel said softly. Do you? You were so young when I remember her voice, and her smell, and how she'd sing when she helped me with my exercises. You are my sunshine, Richard whispered. She'd sing that song. Naomi hums it sometimes. She doesn't know I notice. Richard looked sharply at Naomi, who stood in the doorway. You hum Catherine's song? I didn't know it was hers. It calms Daniel during difficult stretches. Richard stood and walked to the window. Lightning flashed in the distance. The night Catherine died, she was coming home from Daniel's therapy appointment. I was supposed to drive them, but I had a conference call. A stupid conference call about a merger that fell through anyway. Neither Naomi nor Daniel spoke. She called me from the car, said Daniel had taken 3 steps without his crutches. 3 steps. She was so excited, she was crying. I told her I'd celebrate when I got home. 20 minutes later, the police called. Thunder cracked overhead. Richard turned back to face them, tears streaming down his face. The first time Daniel had ever seen his father cry. I've been so afraid of losing you too, he told Daniel. So afraid that if I let anyone close, if I let myself feel anything, I'd fall apart completely. But I've been losing you anyway, haven't I? A little more each day. Daniel dropped his crutches and took a shaky step toward his father. Then another. Then another. Richard moved forward, catching his son as he stumbled on the 4th step, pulling him into an embrace that was 3 years overdue. I'm sorry, Richard whispered into his son's hair. I'm so sorry. They stood there, father and son, holding each other as the storm broke outside. Rain lashed against the windows, but inside, something was healing. Finally, Richard looked up at Naomi. Pack your things. Daniel's head shot up, panic in his eyes. Daddy, no. You promised. Pack your things, Richard continued, and move them to the guest suite in the family wing. If you can help my son, help us. You should be closer. The servants' quarters are too far away. Naomi's eyes widened. Mr. Whitmore, I don't. 1-week trial, Richard said firmly. We'll do this properly. You'll work with Mr. Thompson, document everything. If Daniel continues to improve, we'll formalize your position. Not as a maid, but as, what would you call it? A therapeutic companion? Naomi suggested. Yes, that. Richard set Daniel down gently, making sure he was steady. But there are conditions. Of course there are, Daniel said, but he was smiling through his tears. Family dinners, Richard said. All 3 of us. Every night I'm home. Really? Daniel's eyes shone. And you, Richard pointed at Naomi, you'll tell me everything you're doing with Daniel. No more secrets. I want to learn. You want to learn? Naomi couldn't hide her surprise. My son informed me that families forgive each other and learn from their mistakes. I'd like to try that, if you're willing to teach me. Before Naomi could respond, Daniel threw his arms around her waist. She will. Won't you, Naomi? You'll teach Daddy how to be here. Naomi looked over Daniel's head at Richard. For the first time since she'd started working here, she saw vulnerability in his eyes. Fear, hope, a desperate need to connect with his son, but no idea how to bridge the gap he'd created. I'll try, she said softly. We'll all try. Thunder crashed overhead, and the lights flickered. Daniel squeezed both their hands. Don't let go, he whispered. Either of you. Please don't let go. And for the first time in 3 years, in a study that had seen too much loneliness and not enough love, no one did. The storm from the previous night had left the morning air crystal clear, as if the world had been washed clean. But the serenity was shattered by the crunch of tires on gravel and the sharp voices cutting through the morning quiet. 2 police cruisers sat in the Whitmore driveway, their lights flashing but siren silent. Richard stood at the front door in yesterday's wrinkled shirt. He'd fallen asleep in Daniel's room, something he hadn't done since Catherine died. The sound of voices had woken him. That's the woman. Evan stood beside the police officers, his suit impeccable despite the early hour. She was holding the child when I called. Mr. Whitmore was clearly distressed. The senior officer, a weathered man named Officer Coleman, looked skeptical. Mr. Whitmore, is this your assistant? Yes. Richard's voice was controlled, but Naomi could see the tension in his shoulders. She stood behind him, Daniel clinging to her hand, trembling. He called an possible child abduction. Officer Coleman continued. Said your son was being held by a staff member against your wishes? Daniel's grip on Naomi's hand tightened. I wasn't kidnapped. She saved me. The younger officer knelt down. Hey there, buddy. What's your name? Daniel Whitmore. And this is Naomi. She helped me walk better. I fell last night trying to stop her from leaving, and she caught me. Officer Coleman made notes. Do you feel safe, Daniel? Yes. Safer than ever. Daniel looked at his father. Tell them, Daddy. Tell them it was a mistake. Richard inhaled slowly, his eyes moving from Evan to the officers. The moment stretched out, heavy with possibility. Evan's jaw was set, confident. He made this move to protect the company's image, to remove what he saw as a liability. There's no abduction, Richard said evenly. This is a misunderstanding. Ms. Washington is my son's therapeutic companion. She saved my son from a fall last night when he ventured outside during the storm. Sir, Evan interrupted. The optics of the situation. The optics. Richard turned on his assistant, his voice dropping dangerously low. You called the police on my son's caregiver without speaking to me? The board has concerns about. The board doesn't live in my house or raise my son. Officer Coleman closed his notebook. Mr. Whitmore, given that this appears to be a false alarm, I need to remind you that misuse of emergency services is a serious matter. I understand, officer. This won't happen again. Richard's glare at Evan made it clear who would ensure that. The younger officer handed Richard a card. Child Protective Services may follow up, given a report was filed. It's standard procedure. We'll cooperate fully, Richard replied. As the police drove away, Richard turned to Evan. My study. Now, in the study, Evan stood unrepentant. Richard, you have to understand. The board is already nervous about your reduced presence at the office. If there's even a hint of scandal. Scandal. Richard's voice was ice. The only scandal here is that you presume to make decisions about my family without my knowledge. I'm protecting your interests. No, you're protecting the company's interests. There's a difference, Evan, one I'm just beginning to understand. The shareholders can find another CEO if they're unhappy with my family situation. The words surprised Richard even as he said them. My son is not a liability to be managed. And neither is Ms. Washington. Evan's eyes narrowed. You're not thinking clearly. This woman has obviously manipulated. Get out. Richard, you're on administrative leave, effective immediately. I'll have HR contact you about the terms. Evan's composed facade finally cracked. You can't be serious. Over a maid, over my son, over my family, over a line you had no right to cross. Richard opened the door. Security will escort you out. As Evan left, he passed Naomi in the hallway. You won't last, he muttered. His type always chooses money over everything else. Naomi didn't respond, but she wondered if he was right. An hour later, a gray sedan pulled up. Ms. Avery from CPS was a small woman with sharp eyes and a gentle manner. She insisted on speaking with Daniel privately first, then with each adult separately. Daniel seems well-adjusted, she told Richard afterward. But there are some concerns. He mentioned being lonely, feeling disconnected from you until recently. Recently, he says things have been better since last night, that you're trying to be more present. She consulted her notes. He also speaks very highly of Ms. Washington, says she makes him feel capable. She does, Richard admitted. More than I have. Ms. Avery studied him. Mr. Whitmore, wealth doesn't exempt families from scrutiny. Daniel's physical needs are clearly met, but emotional support is just as crucial. I'm scheduling a follow-up visit in a week. After she left, Richard found Naomi in Daniel's room, working on balance exercises. He watched from the doorway as she coached his son through a particularly difficult sequence. 3-count step, she said softly. Breathe, shift, plant. Daniel wobbled, but caught himself. Like that. Perfect. Your dad's watching. Show him the next part. Daniel glanced at the doorway, smiled at his father, then continued the exercise with renewed determination. Richard entered slowly, uncertainly. "Can you teach me?" he asked Naomi. "The 3 count? So I can help him when you're not here." Naomi and Daniel exchanged glances. "You want to learn?" Daniel asked, hope creeping into his voice. "I want to try." For the next hour, Naomi taught Richard the techniques she'd developed. His movements were stiff at first, awkward. Daniel giggled when Richard nearly tripped over his own feet, trying to demonstrate a weight shift. "You're thinking too much," Naomi told him. "Feel it instead." "I'm not good at feeling," Richard muttered. "Then start small," she suggested. Feel Daniel's hand in yours. Feel the floor under your feet. Feel the rhythm of the movement. By the end of the session, Richard had managed a passable 3-count step. Daniel applauded enthusiastically. "You did it, Daddy." "Barely," Richard said, but he was smiling. That afternoon, while Daniel napped, Naomi handed Richard a thin binder. "I've been documenting everything," she said. "Every exercise, every improvement, every setback." Richard flipped through the pages, seeing meticulous notes, progress charts, even small drawings Daniel had made in the margins. On the last page was a graph showing steady improvement in posture and stride length. "This is remarkable," he said. "You did all this while being a maid?" "I did it while caring about your son," Naomi corrected gently. Richard's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number that turned out to be Evan. "If she stays, the board will want answers." He deleted it without responding. "I need to propose something," Richard said. "A formal arrangement. You stay 1 week as a consultant. Help me show CPS that Daniel is properly supported. I'll double your salary." "I don't want your money, Mr. Whitmore." "Then what do you want?" "Nonda. No gag order. No corporate contracts. If I stay, it's for Daniel, on terms that protect him, not your company's image." Richard was quiet for a moment. "You really don't care about the money?" "I care about that little boy who whispers mommy to my scarf at night because he's so starved for maternal affection. I care about the child who draws pictures of the family he wishes he had. That's worth more than any salary." "Catherine would have liked you," Richard said suddenly, surprising himself. "Tell me about her." And to his own amazement, Richard did. He talked about Catherine's laugh, her stubborn streak, how she'd danced with Daniel in the kitchen while dinner cooked, how she'd made their massive house feel like a home. "She sounds wonderful," Naomi said when he finished. "She was. And I've been so afraid of tarnishing her memory by trying to replace her that I've left Daniel with nothing but echoes." "No one can replace her," Naomi said firmly. "But Daniel doesn't need a replacement. He needs what's here now, a father who's learning to be present, and yes, someone like me who can offer a different kind of support. Not instead of Catherine, but in addition to her memory." That evening, they had their first real family dinner. Richard sat at the head of the table, but he'd moved Daniel's place, sitting closer. Naomi sat across from Daniel, and for once, the massive dining room didn't feel empty. "Tell me about your day," Richard said to Daniel, then caught himself. "Actually, tell me about your week. What did I miss while I was gone?" Daniel lit up, chattering about his exercises, a bird's nest Louise had shown him, how Cook had let him help make cookies. Richard listened, really listened, asking questions, laughing at Daniel's animated descriptions. "And Naomi taught me to count clouds to help with breathing exercises," Daniel added. "We saw one that looked like a dinosaur." "A T-Rex, specifically," Naomi added with a smile. "Clearly," Richard said, surprising them all by playing along. "The tiny arms are a dead giveaway." Daniel giggled so hard he nearly knocked over his water glass. As Naomi tucked Daniel into bed that night, he whispered, "Tell him what you told me." "What's that, sweetheart?" "About being strong and scared." Later, in the hallway, Naomi found Richard standing outside Daniel's door, listening to his son's peaceful breathing. "He wanted me to tell you something," she said. "I told him that people can be strong and scared at the same time. That courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting despite it." Richard was quiet for a long moment. "I've been terrified since Catherine died. Terrified of failing Daniel, of losing him too, of feeling anything that might break me completely. But you're here now. That's courage." Richard's phone lit up with another text from Evan. "Emergency board meeting tomorrow." They want explanations. This time, Richard showed it to Naomi. The outside world isn't going to make this easy. The right thing rarely is, she replied. The next morning brought chaos in a form Richard hadn't anticipated. He woke to his phone buzzing incessantly. 47 missed calls. Over 100 text messages. His lawyer, his publicist, board members, reporters. What the hell? He muttered, scrolling through the messages. Then he saw it. A link from his publicist marked urgent. The video was grainy, clearly from a security camera, but the image was clear enough. Daniel crying in Naomi's arms in the driveway, while police lights flashed in the background. The caption read, "Millionaire's maid seizes child in dramatic standoff." No, Richard breathed. Only someone with access to their security system could have leaked this. Evan. Within an hour, news vans lined the street outside the estate's gates. Luis had to set up privacy screens along the hedges while Mr. Hale rerouted all deliveries through the back entrance. The house felt under siege. "Daddy, why are all those people outside?" Daniel asked at breakfast, peering through the curtains. "Just ignore them," Richard said, but his jaw was clenched. "They'll go away." Naomi entered wearing a baseball cap pulled low, turning her face away from windows. "The photographers have telephoto lenses. We need to keep Daniel away from the windows." "This is insane," Richard muttered. "It's a non-story." "Not anymore," Naomi said, showing him her phone. The story had evolved. Questions arise about Millionaire's household after mysterious Maid drama. Richard's laptop chimed. Video call from aboard. He couldn't avoid this. "Take Daniel to the playroom," he told Naomi. Interior room, no windows. The board meeting was brutal. 5 faces stared at him from his laptop screen, all wearing identical expressions of concern. "Richard, the optics are terrible," Board Chairman William Foster began. "A police incident at your home? Your assistant on administrative leave? And this woman has a name, Ms. Washington, and she's helping my son. She's a liability," another board member interjected. "The shareholders are nervous. Our stock dipped 2 points this morning. Over a manipulated security video. Over instability in leadership," Foster corrected. "Richard, we need you to put out a statement. Distance yourself from this situation. Perhaps Ms. Washington could take a generous severance." "No." The word hung in the air. "I beg your pardon?" Foster's eyebrows rose. "I said no. I will not fire someone who's helping my son to appease shareholders who've never met him." "Richard, be reasonable. Your position is that of a father first, CEO second. If the board has a problem with that, then we have bigger issues to discuss." The call ended with vague threats about emergency votes and leadership reviews. Richard closed his laptop and found Naomi in the hallway, having heard everything. "You don't have to risk your career for us," she said. "It's not a risk. It's a choice. One I should have made years ago." That afternoon, a courier arrived with an envelope marked confidential. Inside was a formal NDA and a check for $50,000. The cover letter from the company's legal team read, "For everyone's protection." Naomi slid everything back into the envelope without signing. "My integrity isn't for sale. They're trying to contain this," Richard said. "Make it go away quietly. Is that what you want? I want my son to be able to walk in his own garden without photographers trying to get pictures. I want him to have a normal life." "He's never going to have a normal life," Naomi said gently. "But he can have a good life. A full life. We just have to weather this storm." That evening, Mr. Hale brought disturbing news. "Sir, I've reviewed the security logs. Evan accessed the system the night before the leak. The timestamp matches." Richard's face darkened. "He planned this." "It appears so, sir." "Can we prove it?" "The digital footprint is clear." Richard made a decision. "Call my lawyer. We're pressing charges for theft of private property and invasion of privacy." But Evan had anticipated this. Within hours, a news story emerged. Fired assistant speaks out about concerns for child's welfare. The headline made Richard's blood boil, but Naomi remained calm. "Don't engage. Don't give him more ammunition. He's attacking my family and showing his true character in the process. Let him." Daniel, meanwhile, was struggling. He could hear the tension in every conversation, see the worry in the adults' faces. During his therapy session with Mr. Thompson, He was distracted and stumbling. "What's wrong, Daniel?" the therapist asked. "Everyone's fighting because of me." Mr. Thompson, a kind man in his 50s, shook his head. "Not because of you. Because they care about you. There's a difference. I just want things to be normal." "What's normal to you?" Daniel thought about it. "Naomi and Daddy and me, together. Without all the yelling and cameras and scary stuff." That gave Naomi an idea. That evening, she proposed something radical to Richard. "Give an interview," she said. "Not a statement, not a press release. A real interview. Show them who you really are, a father trying to do better." "That's insane. It will be playing right into the truth," Naomi interrupted. "Richard, the story they're telling is that you're a cold, distant millionaire with a household in chaos. Show them the man I saw last night, holding his son during a storm. Show them the father learning the 3-count step." Richard considered this. "Would you appear with me?" "If it helps Daniel, yes." The interview was arranged for the next day, with a respected journalist known for fair reporting. But the morning of, another package arrived, this time addressed to Naomi. Inside was a handwritten journal, water-stained and worn. A note was attached. "Found in storage. Thought the family should have this. Catherine's attorney." Naomi opened it carefully. It was Catherine's diary. One page was marked with a ribbon. The entry was dated a week before her death. "If something happens to me, I need Richard to know Daniel doesn't need perfection. He needs presence. He needs love that shows up messy and tired and trying. Hire someone warm, someone who sees Daniel's spirit, not just his disability. Money can buy therapy and equipment, but only love will raise our boy." Naomi brought the journal to Richard, who read it with shaking hands. "She knew," he whispered. "Somehow, she knew she might not, and she tried to tell me what Daniel would need. She loved you both very much. Show this to the journalist," Richard said suddenly. "Let them see what we're really fighting for." The interview took place in the garden where everything had started. Richard spoke honestly about his grief, his mistakes, his journey back to his son. Naomi talked about seeing Daniel's potential, about the difference between professional care and human connection. But the most powerful moment came when Daniel appeared, having snuck out despite instructions to stay inside. He actually walked, across the garden to his father, using his crutches but with a confidence that hadn't been there a week ago. "I wanted to show them," he told the camera. "Naomi taught me, and Daddy's learning too. We're all learning together." The journalist asked one final question. "Daniel, what would you say to other kids who might be watching, kids who face challenges like yours?" Daniel thought carefully, then smiled. "You're stronger than you think. But it's okay to need help. Everyone needs help sometimes. Even daddies." The interview aired that evening. Within hours, the narrative had shifted. The morning show that had run the scandal story issued a correction. Public opinion turned against Evan, especially after Richard's lawyer released the security footage evidence of his theft. But the most unexpected response came from a board. Foster called personally. The shareholders were moved by the interview, he admitted grudgingly. Several major investors actually called to express support. They're suggesting we implement a family wellness initiative for all employees. "Really? Don't gloat, Richard." "But yes, the board is withdrawing its concerns. On one condition, which is you formalize Ms. Washington's position. Make it official above board. No more questions about propriety." Richard found Naomi in Daniel's room, reading him a bedtime story. He motioned for her to continue while he sat in the rocking chair Catherine used to use. As Naomi read, Richard watched his son's face, peaceful, content, safe. This was what he'd almost lost in his grief and fear. This was what Catherine had wanted him to preserve. When Daniel was asleep, Richard walked Naomi to her new room in the family wing. "I need to ask you something," he said. "The board wants to formalize your position. Create an actual role, therapeutic companion, family wellness coordinator, whatever we want to call it. Build a program around what you're doing with Daniel. Would you consider it?" Naomi was quiet for a moment. "With conditions." "Of course," Richard smiled slightly. "What conditions?" "Equal say in Daniel's therapeutic decisions. Direct communication with all his medical providers. And the ability to expand the program to help other families like yours, families with resources but struggling with connection." "Done." And Richard, she used his first name for the first time. You have to promise to keep showing up, even when it's hard, even when work calls, even when grief makes you want to run. I promise. They shook hands, but it felt like more than a business agreement. It felt like the beginning of something Catherine would have blessed, not a replacement for what was lost, but a new foundation for what could be built. Outside, the news vans were pulling away. The story was over for them. Inside the Whitmore mansion, the real story of healing, of family, of learning to love after loss was just beginning. The morning started with Richard showing Naomi the page from Catherine's journal again, his fingers tracing the words as if they might reveal new meaning. She saw me clearly, he admitted, sitting at the breakfast table while Daniel was still sleeping. Even then, she knew I'd bury myself in work if anything happened to her. So does Daniel, Naomi replied, pouring coffee. He's been waiting for you to catch up to what he needs, which is not perfection, just presence. Their conversation was interrupted by the doorbell. Ms. Avery had returned for a follow-up CPS visit, this time accompanied by Dr. Neil Patel, a pediatric mobility specialist. The media attention necessitated a more thorough review, Ms. Avery explained apologetically. Dr. Patel is here to assess Daniel's progress and the appropriateness of his care. Richard tensed, but Naomi touched his arm lightly. It's fine. Let them see what we've been doing. They moved to the therapy room Richard had hastily set up earlier that week, converting a sitting room into a proper space with mats, rails, and equipment. Daniel, now awake and dressed, demonstrated his routine with infectious enthusiasm. This is the superhero stance, he explained to Dr. Patel, showing off his improved balance. Naomi invented it, but now Daddy does it with me too. I see. Dr. Patel made notes, his expression unreadable. And this 3-count step? Naomi demonstrated while Richard counted along, their voices synchronized. Daniel joined them, and for several minutes, the three moved in perfect rhythm. Breathe, shift, plant. Dr. Patel observed everything. The way Daniel's posture had improved, his increased confidence, the natural interaction between all three of them. When Daniel managed 7 unassisted steps across the mat, everyone cheered. Remarkable, Dr. Patel finally said. Daniel, can you show me what you were doing 2 weeks ago? Daniel's face scrunched in concentration. I could only do 3 steps, and I was scared of falling. And now I know falling isn't the end of the world. Naomi and Daddy will catch me, but even if they don't, I know how to fall safely and get back up. Dr. Patel turned to Richard. Mr. Whitmore, who developed this program? Naomi did, based on her experience with her brother. I'm learning from her. It's quite sophisticated. The psychological component integrated with physical therapy, it's what we recommend, but rarely see implemented so naturally. Ms. Avery smiled for the first time. Daniel, are you happy? The happiest. Daniel beamed. Except, there's still something wrong. Everyone froze. What's wrong, sweetheart? Naomi asked carefully. Mr. Peters. Evan. Daniel's voice dropped. He's trying to hurt our family. Richard's jaw clenched. That morning, his lawyer had called with disturbing news. Evan was shopping a tell-all book proposal, claiming insider knowledge of dysfunction in the Whitmore household. We're handling it, Richard assured his son, though privately he wondered how. After the CPS visit concluded with glowing recommendations, Richard retreated to his study to deal with the Evan situation. Mr. Hale knocked and entered with the visitor log Richard had requested. Sir, I found something interesting. Mr. Peters accessed the security system multiple times over the past month, not just the night of the leak. Multiple times? Yes, sir. And Mr. Hale hesitated. He also copied files from your personal computer, financial records, private correspondence about Daniel's medical care, even some of Mrs. Whitmore's personal effects you had digitized. Richard's face darkened. He stole Catherine's letters? It appears so, sir. The violation felt personal now, deeper than corporate espionage. Richard called his lawyer immediately. We can prove theft of intellectual property, invasion of privacy, and breach of fiduciary duty, the lawyer confirmed. But Richard, if you pursue this, it'll mean more media attention. Do it, Richard said firmly. He crossed a line when he involved my son. He crossed another when he touched my wife's memory. That afternoon, Evan was arrested at his apartment. The police found comprehensive files he'd been building, not just recent events, but months of illegally obtained information. His bail was set high, and suddenly his book deal evaporated as publishers recognized the legal liability. But the stress was taking its toll. That evening, during a thunderstorm reminiscent of the night, everything changed. Daniel attempted something that had been his white whale, climbing the front portico steps. These weren't ordinary steps. They were where Catherine's funeral guests had gathered, where Richard had stood holding baby Daniel while accepting condolences. Daniel had avoided them for 3 years. "I want to do it," Daniel announced suddenly, grabbing his crutches. "It's raining," Richard protested. "I know, but Mommy loved thunderstorms. She said they were nature's way of dancing." Before anyone could stop him, Daniel was out the door. Lightning flashed as he approached the steps, 5 of them, wide marble, slick with rain. Naomi ran after him, Richard close behind. They found Daniel at the bottom step, looking up at what must have seemed like Everest. "You don't have to do this," Richard called over the thunder. "Yes, I do," Daniel shouted back. "I need to prove I'm getting stronger." He placed his crutch on the first step, then his foot. The rain made everything treacherous. On the second step, he wobbled dangerously. Naomi moved instinctively, but instead of grabbing him, she knelt behind him, hands hovering but not touching. "I'm here," she said calmly. "Breathe, shift, plant." Daniel steadied himself. Third step. Fourth step. On the fifth, his crutch slipped. Time seemed to slow. Daniel started to fall backward, but his training kicked in. He shifted his weight forward, dropped to his knees safely instead of tumbling backward, and grabbed the portico pillar. "I did it," he cried, pulling himself up. "I didn't fall badly." I remembered. Richard ran up the steps and swept his son into his arms, not caring about the rain soaking through his clothes. "You did it," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Dr. Patel, who had returned to retrieve forgotten notes, witnessed the entire scene from his car. He later signed an affidavit stating he'd observed extraordinary progress in both physical capability and emotional resilience. Inside, as they dried off, Richard's phone rang. The board was calling an emergency session. "Go," Naomi told him. "We'll be fine." But Richard surprised everyone, including himself. "Tell them I'll call in from home. My son just conquered his Everest. The board can wait." The call, when it came, brought unexpected news. "We voted," Foster announced. "Given recent events, the positive publicity from your interview, and frankly, the legal action against Peters which protects company interests, we're not only retaining you as CEO, but approving your family wellness initiative proposal. Really, with a condition. We want Ms. Washington to head it. Her methods are unconventional, but clearly effective." Richard looked at Naomi, who was helping Daniel with his evening stretches. "I'll have to ask her." "There's more," Foster continued. "Several board members have children with various challenges. They want to know if the program could expand beyond mobility issues. That will be Naomi's decision." After the call, Richard found Naomi tucking Daniel into bed. Catherine's journal lay on the nightstand. Daniel had asked to keep it close. "The board wants you to build something bigger," Richard said. "A whole program. Will you do it?" Naomi looked at Daniel, who was fighting sleep to hear her answer. "What do you think, little man? Should we help other kids like you?" "Like us," Daniel corrected. "Other families like us. Because it's not just about walking better. It's about being together better." "Then yes," Naomi said. "But I have terms." "Of course you do," Richard smiled. The next morning, Naomi spread blueprints across Richard's desk. Not architectural blueprints, but plans for a program that could change lives. "The Blue Step Initiative," she announced, "named after the portico steps in your wife's journal with a blue ribbon." Richard studied the plans. They were comprehensive: daily logs, caregiver training modules, family integration sessions, and something called micro-victory celebrations. "What's this last part?" he asked. "Every small win gets acknowledged. Not with money or gifts, but with presence. A hug, a cheer, a moment of true recognition." It's what Daniel responded to most. "And you want to implement this company-wide?" "Beyond that, I want to create a certification program. Train other therapeutic companions. Make this available to families who have resources but lack connection. Richard was quiet for a moment. You've thought this through. I've lived it. With Caleb first, now with Daniel. Families get so focused on fixing what's broken that they forget to celebrate what's growing. That afternoon, Richard did something unprecedented. He held a press conference on the mansion's lawn. No spin doctors, no prepared statements beyond basic notes. I want to apologize, he began, surprising everyone. Not for the recent drama, but for something deeper. For years, I've let wealth masquerade as wisdom. I thought providing the best specialists and equipment meant I was being the best father. I was wrong. He continued, a week ago, my son couldn't walk across wet stones. Today, he climbed steps in a thunderstorm. The difference wasn't new equipment or a better specialist. It was someone who saw him as whole, not broken. Someone who taught me that love shows up messy and tired and trying. He gestured to Naomi, who stepped forward reluctantly. Ms. Washington will be heading our new family wellness initiative. Not as a token gesture, but as a leader. She'll be developing programs that bridge the gap between medical care and human connection. A reporter raised her hand. What about Evan Peters? The criminal charges? Mr. Peters violated our trust and our privacy. He's facing appropriate legal consequences. But I want to be clear, his actions stem from a corporate culture I helped create, one that valued image over authenticity. That changes now. What about those who say you're being manipulated? Another reporter called out. Daniel, who had been watching from the porch, walked forward with his crutches. My dad's not being man-up. Monty, he struggled with the word. Manipulated, Naomi supplied gently. That, he's being taught. We're all learning. Naomi's teaching us how to be a family that doesn't just live in the same house, but actually lives together. The questions continued, but the narrative had shifted completely. This wasn't about scandal anymore. It was about transformation. Over the next days, Naomi negotiated her contract with the precision of a corporate lawyer and the heart of a caregiver. Independent governance for the program. Non-disparagement clauses running both ways. A scholarship fund for aides pursuing therapeutic certification, with the first scholarship going to support her brother Caleb's aid training. You're giving away money you could keep, Richard noted. I'm investing in what matters. You taught me that, even if you forgot it yourself for a while. The program launched quietly at first. Richard insisted on being in the pilot group, attending every training session, learning not just techniques but philosophy. Vulnerability is not weakness, Naomi taught the group of executives who'd enrolled their families. It's the birthplace of connection. Richard found himself in a room with other CEOs, other millionaires, all admitting they didn't know how to connect with their children beyond providing material success. I thought if I gave him everything, he'd have everything, one father admitted about his daughter with autism. But everything isn't everything without presence, another mother realized. The sessions were transformative. Richard learned to sit on the floor with Daniel, to be silly, to let his son see him fail at exercises and laugh about it. He learned that Daniel didn't need a perfect father. He needed a present one. One evening, Richard visited Caleb's care facility with Naomi and Daniel. He'd funded new equipment, but at Naomi's insistence, put it in Caleb's name, not his own. So you're the rich guy learning humility, Caleb teased from his wheelchair. Film at 11. Everyone laughed, and Richard realized this was what had been missing, the ability to be human, flawed, and finding joy anyway. Your sister saved my family, Richard told Caleb. Nah, Caleb replied. She just showed you it was worth saving. Ms. Avery returned for her final CPS visit. She found Daniel in the garden, teaching another child from the program, a girl with cerebral palsy, the 3-count step. You're like me, the girl exclaimed. But you can do it. We can do it, Daniel corrected. Together is better. Ms. Avery closed her file with a note, stable, supportive, thriving. Recommend this family as a model for integrated therapeutic support. That evening, the household staff gathered in the kitchen for an impromptu celebration. Mr. Hale raised his teacup in a toast. To Mr. Whitmore, he said, who didn't hire a savior but learned to listen to one. Luis added, and became the father his son drew in those pictures. Cook wiped her eyes. 3 months ago, this house was cold as marble. Now it's warm as fresh bread. Richard stood to respond, but found himself too emotional to speak. Naomi squeezed his shoulder. "Catherine will be proud," she whispered. That night, Richard wrote a letter to Daniel, to be opened in 10 years. "My son, the day I learned to count your steps with you was the day I learned to live. Not exist, not manage, not control, but truly live." Naomi taught us that strength isn't independence, it's interdependence. It's knowing when to lead, when to follow, and when to simply stand together. Your mother knew this. She tried to tell me, but I had to learn it through nearly losing you. I pray that by the time you read this, our family, unconventional as it may be, has shown you that love isn't perfect. It's present. He sealed it in an envelope and placed it in a cedar box beside Catherine's journal. The Blue Step initiative grew rapidly. Within 6 months, it had expanded to 3 cities with 100 families enrolled. The scholarship program had funded 12 therapeutic companions. Academic studies were being conducted on their methods. But the real measure of success was smaller, quieter. It was Richard canceling a board meeting to attend Daniel's therapy milestone. It was Naomi presenting data to executives while Daniel drew pictures of his expanding family, now including other children from the program. It was Daniel teaching a younger child the superhero stance, saying, "You're stronger than you think, but it's okay to need help." It was Richard and Naomi developing an easy partnership, not romantic, but something deeper. Co-parents in the truest sense, united in their dedication to Daniel and the other children they were helping. "We're not a traditional family," Richard said one evening as they watched Daniel play with other children from the program. "No," Naomi agreed. "We're something new, something that Catherine somehow saw we need to become." A year later, at the initiative's first anniversary gala, Daniel spoke to the crowd. He was taller now, his steps more confident, though he still used one crutch for longer distances. "When I was littler," he began, getting a laugh, "I thought being strong meant doing everything by myself. But that's not true. Being strong means knowing who to reach for when you need a hand. My dad had to learn that. Naomi had to teach us. And now we all know we can do it, but we do it better together." The audience, filled with families who'd been transformed by the program, erupted in applause. Later, as the sun set over the garden where everything had begun, Richard, Naomi, and Daniel stood on the path where that first confrontation had occurred. The stones were wet from an afternoon shower. "Show me," Richard said to Daniel. Daniel handed his crutch to Naomi and walked, truly walked, across the wet stones. His gait wasn't perfect, might never be, but it was confident, determined, his. He turned back, beaming. "I can do it." Richard and Naomi answered in unison, their voices carrying across the garden with absolute certainty. "We know." The mansion behind them was no longer cold marble and empty rooms. It was filled with laughter from the children's therapy group that met twice weekly. The walls displayed new artwork, Daniel's drawings alongside those of other children, all showing families in their beautiful, imperfect present reality. Catherine's portrait still hung in the main hall, but now it was surrounded by photos of a life that had grown from loss. Daniel walking, Richard kneeling beside him, Naomi teaching, families learning together. The Whitmore family had been broken by grief, nearly destroyed by distance, but ultimately redeemed by the simple act of showing up for each other. They weren't perfect. They were something better. They were present, they were trying, and they were together. In the end, that was everything. What walls have you built around your heart to avoid pain? And who might be waiting on the other side with the love you didn't know you needed? If this story touched your heart, please like and subscribe for more powerful stories that remind us that sometimes being broken is the first step to becoming whole.